so most of you know Pam, but we're happy to have this show here, and it's actually our first solo painting show of PDNB's history, I think.
Cool.
I mean, we've had a show for you before, but that wasn't the only. Come on in. Elaine, come on in. So we're really excited to have this show because, number one, we have a long-standing relationship with Pam and her husband, Don, who is no longer with us, and which is it has to do with this show. And we're just very excited to, display painting in the gallery like this in such full force, and especially to have all this gold in the gallery in the basement of the bank building. And we're just thrilled to have this show up, and it's very special to the gallery's history, and it's special for our relationship. And I'll just give her the floor. So
thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, there is, and I have a habit of going on too long. So what I want to do, I've got a few notes to keep me on track to just give you some of the basic things that you might need to know about why I'm doing this and where the history is. And then I'm just going to open the floor to questions. So a couple of things that are recurring interests, really primary interests for my work and have been for a long time, is the mystery of dreams and faith and the natural world. And for me, all my life, these things have intersected. So we can talk more about that at some other point. But dreams, faith, and the natural world. Some recurring motifs, particularly in the last 20 years, are obviously gold. The gold was there more than 20 years ago as a decorative element, but for reasons I can get into in a longer story, that changed at about 2020. At about 2005. So 20 years ago, that changed, and I started using the gold with a great deal more intent and for purposes of content. The nests are recurring probably for the last 10 or 15 years. I live on 3 beautiful acres in Argyle with a pond, and it's not unusual for me to find nests. And for a long time, I thought, I'm not going to try to paint that. I would lose my mind. And at some point, I engaged with it. It was like a puzzle. So the nests have a lot of different kinds of meanings for me as well. Winged creatures, both insects and birds, often just wings, butterflies, that kind of thing you will see a lot of in my work. And I think that ties back into dreams and flight in particular, and particular icons and motifs from my dream life. Overall, I see these as icons. I grew up in the traditional Episcopal Church with a lot of Episcopal priests in our family background. And the iconography that was traditional in the liturgical sense was something that was explained to me, even as a young child. And the beauty of the objects really captured my attention during my adolescence when I didn't really want to go to church, but I would sit and look at the beautiful objects and I knew what they meant. And eventually that tied into my work as a performance artist, ritual, iconography, all of that tied back together. So dreams, faith in the natural world, gold, nests, and winged creatures. I see them as icons. And then we get to this particular body of work. And mostly I see this, when Don died, I was faced with one of those existential realities of going from being a we to an I. We didn't marry until I was 38 and he was 49, so I'd been an I for a long time and was very comfortable with it and didn't think that was ever going to change. But we spent almost 35 years together as a we, developing the intricacies of communication that a long-term couple does. And so then I had some warning. I knew he was dying, but becoming an I is not the same as the I that was possible when I was in my 20s and 30s. Our social structures have changed and those kinds of things. So this is about that journey. The 2 large paintings were the first 2 that occurred after his passing. This one was the very first. And they were very much inspired by really long, epic kind of dreams, very narrative dreams that I woke up recalling every single bit of. Don died during the freeze in 2023 in February. It was actually the end of January when this whole metroplex was under ice. He went into hospice, I think the last week of January, and continuous care. He became unconscious. And 2 days later, that storm hit, and nobody could come. Even the hospice workers couldn't come. And you know what the physics of the environment are during a snowstorm? Everything gets muffled and it's quiet. And on top of that, there was no traffic. There was nothing. And the storm was gone and the sky had cleared. And at night, when I was sitting up with him, it was just quiet. It was as though the world had gotten still for him to pass. And so when I woke up several weeks after his passing, people look at that and they go, why the ice skate? Don's sense of humor was famous. And one day when I was typing up his website and his business cards for him, I said, so what do you want in the fonts? He said, Don, artist, soldier, academic, and thin ice skater. I was like, what? And he said, my grandmother used to shake her finger at me and say, young man, you were skating on thin ice. So it was on all his business cards, and it's on his website still. And I woke up thinking of the ice skater, and without getting out of bed that morning, I found a pair of 1940s men's ice skates on Etsy, and for $16, I had them in my hand 2 days later. And when they arrived, if you look closely at this painting, the old worn-out label said victory. Don spent 3 years in seminary before deciding that that was not his calling, that his calling was to be an artist. But in the tradition of the Southern Baptists and maybe the Catholics, when you go to victory, you have made it through the rough time and you've gotten to the good place. And I got that and I thought, that was my affirmation that I was on the right track with that painting and the rest of my imagery for that dream. So this is about the frozen night that he died.
And how long did it take you to pick up your brush after he died?
Not long. This image and the drawings for it and the plans for it happened within about 6 to 8 weeks after he died. And then I had to order the frames. In the meantime, I went to New England, visited with my brother. And that was fabulous, living in the woods on a river. And the week I came home, the frames, the panels had arrived. So I started painting. So he died the 3rd day of June. No, so it's the 3rd day of February. Yeah, I started painting in May. It took about 6 months to finish that one. And by the time I was finished with that one, I had had the dreams that this one is based on. And I had ordered 2 panels that size, so, what the hell. I did another big one. I don't usually work this big.
We told you, we said, after the last show, you should go bigger.
I know. It was all their fault. They said, we need more bigger stuff. And I was like, okay, more bigger. We get it. Bill, this is what you got. And I may never do it again because they are a hassle. I do have a very, very perceptive friend who is also an artist when I was complaining about how big and heavy and awkward they were. And she said, Pam, they're about grief. Maybe they're supposed to be awkward and cumbersome. Like, okay. So I bought into it. As that one is the story about his path forward, this one is the story about my path forward. And in a particular dream, again, he came to me, as he always had looked in his worn-out work shirts and his worn-out blue jeans, and he handed me this almost midnight blackish blue velvet dress that was encrusted with sparkles and said, tonight I'm taking you dancing in the Milky Way. And then I woke up. And as I woke up, I thought, he wasn't giving me the dress to go dancing in it. The dress was the Milky Way. It was dark and sparkly. And that gave me this idea of if I could, like Harry Potter's cloak of invisibility, I could put on a dress that made me the Milky Way. That all of me became all of the Milky Way. That the vastness of that was somehow really reassuring that that might be where he was. That ties into, he used to say that if he had not, thought about priesthood, didn't do that. He was a soldier in Vietnam, didn't do that until they told me didn't have to anymore. Then he was a teacher, he kept doing that forever, and he kept being an artist. But he said if he had not followed those 2 paths, he might have been an astronomer. He loved going out at night and watching the stars. And when we first lived out there, the sky was dark enough that you could see them. Not anymore, there's too much light pollution. But there were a lot of nights when he'd come wake me up and it'd be cold at night. And he'd go, come sing, you gotta get out on the deck. I was like, I really don't want to get up. But he'd throw Parker on me and we'd go back out there. And he'd point up there, and sometimes at the end when I was done being patient, he'd say, okay, but when I'm gone someday, that's where you're gonna find me. And I remember one night I got kind of pissed at him and said, all right, enough of this. Just tell me, which damn star? Just tell me where I'm gonna find it, and I'll know where I'm looking, and I'm gonna go back to bed. And he showed me how to find Polaris, the North Star. So I'm working on this painting all those years later after he's gone. And I really started out as a design problem. What do I do with all this space? And I thought of the North Star, I thought of constellations, I thought of what I'd done with the sky in that painting. And I just started skimming through my phone. And there is a thing that photographers can do. You might know about this. If you put a time lapse on the camera pointed at the North Star, there are one of two effects you can get. You can either get concentric circles, or over a time lapse, what you get is the Fibonacci spiral. And I looked at that and went, the Fibonacci spiral. I used to lecture on Fibonacci and the golden mean as a figure drawing instructor. And it was always starting at the North Star, where he said he would be. So I put that on the heart of the dress. I call it the Milky Way dancing dress. So the boots were the last Christmas present that he gave me. But again, I was painting about my path forward. And when we met, one of the things that he kind of liked about me was I had a really kick-ass pair of boots. I had some really good mountain climbing boots. And I said, they're like wearing little houses, you know, my toes can wiggle in there and they're comfy and I can go anywhere all day. And by the time he was ill, they had worn out and I didn't have any. And the 2 winters prior to that had been really rough. The Christmas prior to that, I had spent all of Christmas Eve day underneath our house with our grown granddaughter, thank God who's an Air Force officer, fixing a broken pipe, a frozen broken pipe. And it was wet and it was damp and it was mushy. And he kept saying, don't you have any better shoes to wear out there? I was like, nope, all I got is this. And we're going back under. So that Christmas after that, he was pretty ill. And he said, I want to get you a Christmas present. And I'm thinking, sure, honey, whatever. I'll help you. He said, I want you to have a decent pair of boots. And I'm going to tell you where you need to go. And you're going to go there and you're going to take me with you. And you're going to go in and pick one. And they let me go out in the parking lot. And he opened the passenger door and looked at him, poked him and said, yep, that's the ones. And he died knowing that I was going to at least have good shoes on my feet for whatever was coming. And, you know, I thought of stories of people crossing the Alps during the Nazi invasion and people not being dressed because it was early springtime and toes freezing and things. And the people who survived had good hiking boots. And this story of, he was of German descent. He knew those stories. So this was from my path forward. And the ocean is what I told Missy today. That's my calm down spot. Every time I drive to Fort Worth to the doctors, they tell me, do you know you have high blood pressure? I go, no, it's just I-35. It really is. And they say, well, give it a minute and visualize something calming and we'll try it again. And I visualized the calm ocean where I grew up and where I had spent some time after Don died. And immediately blood pressure goes right back down. Yeah, so there had to be a little bit of that sunset on the ocean over Polaris and the Milky Way dancing dress. So these are all very personal and specific to my story kinds of images and choices that are a mixture of my experience and the iconography that they mean to me, and also just formal design shapes. You know, there are shapes that I love that just worked given all the options that I might have had meaning. So
regarding the spiral, this is just an astronomy thing.
yeah,
When do you get a concentric versus spiral?
I would have to look it back up again, but that's what I remember when I was looking at it. One of them was doing one thing with the exposure and the other was another. And
Because if you're right at the North Star, I would think it ought to be concentric.
it would always be concentric, and the other thing I do remember about that was that because eventually, we're talking eons from now, the North Star itself will no longer be the center point. That won't be possible. Mm-hmm. So even that is not permanent forever and ever. But I do remember seeing one that was like the target signal image, yeah. This is the one I picked, so that's the one I remember the most about. After that, the rest of these images really were the result of me wandering through the house and through my studio. My studio has a lot of nests in them. I am not an ottoman. I don't know much about birds. It really doesn't matter to me. But I did learn one thing that was interesting and applicable to the way I use and choose my nests is that some birds build their nests and they plan to come back to them. They come back every year. And some birds, I think it's cardinals, get a new one every year. And so the ones that are redone every year are like this one. And I titled that one Build. And it's a square-shaped nest. It was built inside a box shape, and it is solid. It has this incredible architectural sort of structure to it. And obviously somebody was coming back to it, but my friend who gave it to me said she waited 2 seasons and nobody came back. So I took it. But there are others like this one that is probably, I don't know, it's a kind of bird that isn't going to use that nest again. They said you can find them just sitting out in the open on a post. It might blow away. It's not going to get reused, and this bird just doesn't build lasting nests. And so I did select kinds of nests that seemed to work in an intuitive way with the subject matter. I walked around the house. I had little buckets, and I put stuff, lots of stuff, in buckets that seemed to go together. And then I went to the studio with the seamless and the camera, and I arranged them in arrangements. Sometimes I didn't use everything that was in the bucket. Sometimes I grabbed from other things. Sometimes I went looking for one more thing. And then I photographed them in several lightings and several arrangements, and I work from that for my paintings. So that's how my process works, and my mental and my physical process. So I'm ready for questions.
How does the gold specifically relate to, say, these nest things?
I think of the gold as the primary vehicle for it being an icon. Okay. Number one. But I also love the fact that gold has so many meanings. It is AU on the chart of elements. It has a very specific molecular makeup, unlike anything else in the universe. It has certain properties, one of which is its beautiful color, the other of which, as a metal, it reflects light back. And so civilizations have used it as anything from objects on an altar to simulate the light of God, shining back on parishioners or the faithful. It is found deep in the bowels of the earth, just the opposite. It's housed in the basement of Fort Knox. It has both the banal and the most crass of applications and intentions, and it has the most beautiful and ethereal. And in 2012, I was privileged to have my work selected for a show at the Belvedere Palace and Museum, an exhibition titled Gold, and everything in the exhibition was gold. The premise of the show by the curator was that Thomas von Scherm had said that there was an almost bias in contemporary art against the use of gold as something tricky or decorative. And this whole body of work in the show was about people who were using gold in a contemporary sense in the 20th and 21st century with the intent of using it for content. And 6 feet away from one of my still lifes was Andy Warhol's dried up banana peel that was golded. That was the kind of range of work that was in that show. So in that exhibition, though, imagine a museum quality space. The modern wing was white with spectacular lighting, and every object in the show had real gold. The light, the physical sensation of light in that room was intoxicating. You could feel, you know how a warm gel on a stage light makes everybody look healthy and happy, even the palest, and just that golden light made everybody look really great. And you kind of felt better. It was an amazing physical feeling to be in the presence of something that much of the possibilities of gold.
A lot of medieval paintings have gold. Is there any kind of reference to that?
That's actually one of my influences. There's a piece at the Meadows, and I can't for the life of me say the name of it. It is a saint. He's about 7/8, 5/6 life size on a large painting with he's in a black robe and he's a gilded backdrop. And we had been at a different show, it was in the evening, and we were wandering through other parts of the museum, and I saw that one, I just froze, because this saint appeared to be floating on the gold. It's the effects of the opaque paint on the metallic surface, and he was just hovering. And I thought, oh, that's what I want this to do. So for me, using that flat backdrop with the still lifes, that's part of the intentionality, is that they hover like an icon. And the banded technique that I use with a lot of the other work is actually a reference back to my performance beginnings. Because I started in art in drama in high school, and a lot of ballet and tap and gymnastics. So the idea of my arms and legs making lines in space within the proscenium of a stage was something I was taught from the time I was 5 or 6. And so being the drawing, I am the drawing, was something that I kind of understood viscerally. Maybe that's why I am the Milky Way dancing dress. I don't know. There's this sense of self as line. And so for these, they create a depth of space and the fifth wall that I can't do with these. These are really more about levitating.
Can you talk about this painting over here?
This one? Sure. Titles are also important. This one's titled Discernment. And the objects that I had collected from around the house, I realized that there were a lot of things that I connected with Don that had to do with sight and vision. And I'm thinking of all the impact of, our sight and our vision. There were his glasses, and he had binoculars. There were also little magnifying glasses, little opera glasses. There were so many I had to pick from, and maybe I'll go back to some of the others, but these are the ones that I picked for compositional reasons. And then faith and academics and learning. So I had stacked books, and I picked, they actually are a stack of Bibles, but I didn't want to be heavy-handed, so I turned the Bible spines around to the back. But I love the gilded page and the possibility for reflections. I picked, out of the objects that I had in my bucket, I picked his old binoculars, which were beat up, for those things that which we cannot see from afar. And I picked the bifocals for that which we need help to see what's up too close. And the icon of the Catholic faith, which is where he started, for that which we cannot see at all. And I had that stacked, and I worked with it as a composition, and it just felt kind of not done. And I got, again, sometimes this is reliant on intuition, dreams, and in this case, I got a text from a girlfriend who lives 2 miles from me on a much bigger, much more densely populated, beautiful estate. And she said, look at the fledgling that was in my barn this morning when I went to feed the horses. And I thought, okay, you go in that painting. You were meant for that. He was just amazing. The photograph was a bad quality photograph. She couldn't find a way again to get a better quality. I had to look at images of owl's eyes to get a better owl eye, that kind of thing. But I just knew that an infant owl being our traditional cultural icon for wisdom, but he's a baby, was just the perfect thing to stack and have his little claws, his talons digging into the books. It finished the composition for me in form and in content. And that one has been purchased to be in the Perkins School of Theology at SMU.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.